Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
First here, for thousands of anxious students, the wait was over this morning as A-level results came out. And it was good news for the boys, who've overtaken girls in achieving top A and A-star grades for the first time in 17 years. It follows drastic changes to the way the exams are assessed, which, say critics, could have unfairly disadvantaged girls. At the same time, though, fewer students have been accepted to university, with thousands of places still up for grabs. Simeon Brown has more.
Only journalists are mean enough to make teenagers reveal their exam results on TV. Yes, it's A-level results day again. In Wales, where entries were at its lowest for a decade. In Northern Ireland, where the gender gap has widened. And in England, where boys are on the up.
That's it, you got your grades.
Well done.
Well done.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Oh. Well done.
Don't cry, you've got to get one.
We're in Nottingham to speak with two high-flying students, but this year there's a catch. Did you apply to university this year?
Yes, I applied at Nottingham. Found out this morning I got in.
But you're not going?
I'm not going now.
Alex would have been the first in his family to go on to university. Neither of Eve's parents have ever been. Both are the kinds of A-grade working-class students. There had been a huge push to get into university.
I loved the course, I loved the university, and I was sure that I was going to end up there.
And what changed?
I looked at the costs. It's very expensive, just living costs alone, and the university costs, that's £20,000 a year, give or take, and then there's money on top of that for a lifestyle where you go out with your friends, you know, that sort of thing.
A-levels were once the ticket to university, but other students taking them beginning to change their destination. When clearing opened, there were 25,000 fewer applications to universities since last year. So what's up? Well, tuition fees are now £9,250 a year. The interest rate on student loans is also being raised to 6.1%. But surprisingly on the up is the performance of boys in England and Wales. Overall, 26.6% of males achieved an A or A-star grade, compared to 26.1% for girls.
A great day today. We've seen over 400,000 applicants get places at the university of their choice. And what we've seen is a change from when we were looking at application figures back in June and July to placements now. So actually, although there's a reduction, it's not as big a reduction as we saw in applications. And there's a couple of reasons for that. We think that the level of mature students, also the reduction in EU applicants. But the great news is that the number of 18-year-olds going in is at a record high in terms of entry rates.
But back at New College, Nottingham, that does not apply to these students. Alex will now be doing an apprenticeship, and Eve is assessing her options.
For me, I had to kind of weigh up what is the next 3 to 4 years of a fun time, what I want, or the next 20 to 30. And I had to kind of look at it a long-term type of way. I didn't want to be coming out of university and potentially not being employable because I don't have that experience that a lot of employees want.
There's still record numbers of university places, but it's a busy market. And considering the costs, even A-grade A-level students appear to be more cautious in selecting their next steps.
Well, as Simeon mentioned, there many students go on to university and leave burdened with tens of thousands of pounds in debt. The last Tory manifesto author, Nick Timothy, claimed today that student fees had created an unsustainable and ultimately pointless Ponzi scheme. Well, earlier I spoke to the Minister for Universities, Joe Johnson, and asked him what he made of that.
Well, I think it's wrong to think of it as a straightforward debt. It's very, very different to a debt in lots of important ways. And it's really important that students who are considering their university choices today really understand this critical point. First of all, you don't repay any loan until you're earning well above what they would expect, above £21,000. And that loan is written off entirely after 30 years.
But then after you're earning £21,000, you then repay that loan with interest of 6.1%. I mean, would you have been happy with that as a student?
The interest rate needs to be seen in the context of what is clearly not a commercially available loan product. You would never get in the commercial marketplace a loan with the kinds of features I've just described. You don't repay until you're earning above £21,000 and the loan is entirely written off after 30 years.
But nevertheless, students could be expected to fund what their course costs. That's understandable. But actually, if they're then paying interest on top of that, isn't that something you'd need to look at again in terms of the context of inflation? You're using a particular measure of inflation that isn't necessarily the standard. Should you look at a different measure?
Well, we always keep the system under review to ensure it's fair and effective. But it's important that the government recoups its costs in making these loans available. The government doesn't.
So when you're saying it's under review, it may change. You may make that interest rate
formula. We always keep the system under review on a permanent basis to ensure it remains fair and effective as the economy changes. That's why, for example, we froze the threshold at which the repayment starts at £21,000 in 2015 because the circumstances in which the system was working had changed.
Is 6.1 the top? Can you assure students that, or are you happy for it to go higher?
You can't look at the interest rate in isolation. This is a heavily subsidised loan product. It's completely wrong to think that the student is paying the entire cost of higher education. It's certainly not true. The government is making a substantial contribution.
I'm just going to ask this one more time. You would be happy, in theory, for that 6.1% interest rate to go higher? I
think what's important is to look at the interest rate in the context of what is a heavily subsidised loan
You've made that clear, but I mean, are you happy for it to go higher or not?
Well, no, I think what you need to understand is the interest rate is part of a bundled subsidised loan product on which the government makes a substantial loss, and that's not really a loss because it's a conscious investment by the government in the skills base of the country.
You promised to raise annually the £21,000 threshold, earnings threshold, at which students start to pay back their loans. You haven't. When do you think you might make good on that 7-year-old promise?
Well, we've committed to review the rate at which repayments start. Currently, it's £21,000 in 2021, and that's the commitment which we've made and which we will honour.
The average student, I'm sure you know, will be leaving university with debts on average £50,000, and yet the average university vice-chancellor's salary is £278,000, and the University of Bath is £450,000. How do you justify that?
Well, I've called for restraint in the sector. I want
Which hasn't been heeded.
I want senior level pay to sort of cease this relentless upwards ratchet which we've been seeing.
Any sign of that happening?
Students can reasonably expect that their tuition fees are being spent on the things which benefit them, the quality of teaching, the feedback, the assessment, and so on. And it is right that we restrain the growth in senior level pay.
But do you think that's being heeded, that call?
Well, I think we do need the new regulator, the Office for Students, to take this issue very seriously indeed. And that's why I've set out recently some thoughts that will inform our consultation on the new regulatory framework, which is launching in the autumn, as to how the Office for Students might do that. And I've asked it to consider requiring evidence of exceptional performance to justify exceptional pay above the level of the Prime Minister. So that's roughly £150,000.
So Vice-Chancellor pay will come down. You're confident of that?
I'm confident that the Office for Students is going to tackle the issue of the upwards ratchet and ensure that we see the restraint which ministers have been calling for.
Joe Johnson, thank you very much.
Okay.
It's one of the perennial stories of summer. Each August A-level results day sparks scenes of joy and disappointment for teenagers across the country before the scramble for university places begins. But today, things perhaps felt a little different. For one, the debate over tuition fees, £9,000 a year, was brought alive before the election when the Labour Party made ditching them one of its flagship pledges. And today we heard of an unprecedented buyer's market in clearing, with confirmed places down 2% on last year, and many universities seeking students to fill the lecture halls from September. Beyond this, some have asked bigger questions about whether mass access to higher education is really the best thing for the country and its students. Helen Thomas has been examining the picture.
Results Day was once irrelevant, to most of the country at least. In the 1950s, less than 5% of young people went to university. These days, close to half of 18-year-olds are headed in that direction. And that's despite growing unease about the system. Fees of £9,000 a year, interest rates of over 6%. Back at the centre of the political agenda. True, the total number of students accepted to university today fell slightly on last year, but the percentage of English and Scottish 18-year-olds getting a university place rose again. The simple critique is that high fees discourage people from going to university, and that just doesn't appear to be true. Loans that are only paid back when future earnings hit a certain level have worked in that regard. The bigger question is whether shoveling more and more students into the university system is the right thing to do. Are the students still getting value for money? And are more and more university graduates what the country and the economy really needs?
Well, I don't want to rain on kids' parade today. They're getting their A-level results and, they've done really well. But the bottom line is I think the system is pretty broken. We've got 1 in 2 18-year-olds now going to university nearly. They're coming out, average debt is about £57,000. Their chances of getting a job that's going to pay them enough to repay that debt, very small. Very few are going to get graduate level jobs as we know them. And on top of that, you've got a black hole in the public finances because the government is lending money to these kids to go to university. It's a system that doesn't work for anyone.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies found that graduates do earn more than non-graduates, the so-called graduate premium. And non-graduates were twice as likely to have no earnings after 10 years. But they found big differences to those returns between different institutions and between different subjects.
The graduate earnings premium continues to be robust, and obviously it's an average, and you're right to draw attention to the fact that there are some courses which aren't delivering those kinds of returns. And that's why, as a government, we are working very hard to make sure students have the capacity for informed choices, that they know where the returns are good, they know where graduate outcomes are good.
If students need to be more discerning, could the same be said of universities too? Fees now account for about half of university funding, up from maybe a third before the last hike in fees. That's led to a scramble for some institutions to get students in the door.
At the moment, universities are really engaged in what's been called a race to the bottom. They are taking students with less than 2 E grades at A-level and they're putting them onto university degree courses. And that's just a disaster because these students are not going to succeed. Dropout rates at universities are rising, and every time a student drops out, that's a personal tragedy.
Next, please.
Some think the UK system has just lost sight of the fact that university isn't, or shouldn't be, for everyone, and that other options like vocational courses or apprenticeships have been squeezed out.
I don't think as a country we need more university students, no. I've felt for a long time that we have made a terrible mistake in this country, whereas pretty much everybody else in the world has more than one type of higher education institution. We have decided to put all our eggs into a university basket. So basically, if at 18 you want to do some further study, you can go to a university or you can go to a university. You can do a 3-year degree or you can do a 3-year degree. And that's basically it.
It's something the government is trying to change, upping both the provision and the prestige of technical and vocational courses. More options could be better for the next generation of students and the country.
David Willetts was Universities Minister when the coalition government trebled tuition fees. He's now a Conservative peer and joins us from Southampton. Amate Doku is Vice Chair of the National Union of Students, and Sir David Bell is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Reading. He was previously the senior civil servant in the Department of Education. Lord Willetts, to you first. Nick Timothy, the Prime Minister's former Chief of Staff, wrote in the Daily Telegraph today that effectively this has become a Ponzi scheme. This is not offering value, calling for radical reform, and is unsustainable and ultimately pointless. How accurate is he, Lord Willetts?
I don't agree with Nick on that, because the government, of course, does provide money to the students when they go to university and then expects them to pay back if they're in well-paid jobs. And the economic evidence is still pretty clear that, on average, being a graduate is going to earn you more than being a non-graduate. And setting aside the economic gains, just the broadening of your horizons, the kind of experience you have for those 3 years, sets you up for life. So I'm a believer in more people going to university. I think it's worked well for Britain and it's worked well for individuals. Of course, there have to be a range of other options as well. But those young people who are getting good A-level grades today and are going forward to university, they've got a very good chance of 3 years that will transform their lives for the better.
Yes, and I don't want to rain on the parade, good luck to them, but you say it's good for those who pass, but a recent report showed that there's a third of graduates who are in jobs where they didn't even need the degree in the first place. How can you justify that?
Well, during their 20s, especially since the crash, there has been a slower process of younger people getting promotion and moving on and up in the jobs ladder. However, in a tougher jobs market, it actually makes going to university and being a graduate even more important. And a lot of those jobs that are called non-graduate jobs, when you look into it closely, there's quite a debate. Maybe the jobs themselves have become more technically demanding, maybe the regulations are more onerous, maybe the level of equipment and kit you have to deal with is more sophisticated. There does seem to be a process, not just in Britain, but around Western countries, where jobs do become graduate jobs, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. That may tell us something about how economies advance.
It wasn't that long ago that the fees were £1,000. They're now £9,000. Is the education 9 times better then? And what are the interests that these students are charged on the money?
Well, I'll be frank about this. There were lots of reasons for putting in the fees at 9,000, and as you said in your introduction, I was involved in that. It was partly that we could see that universities had been underfunded and students had been in crowded seminars in dilapidated buildings with insufficient access to modern equipment when they were doing vocational and technical courses, and we needed to boost the resource going to universities, and there was no way any government was going to do that by putting in more public spending.
But the 6%, how comfortable are you with that, Lord Willits? That's a lot of cash for these students.
Well, of course, it's not cash for the students. The students don't pay up front.
Well,
what really
not
matters,
front, but ultimately, let's not dance on the head of a pin, come on.
No, what matters is that graduates pay back at 9% of their earnings above £21,000 a year. That is the crucial figure. It means that for many graduates, indeed it's the case that above a high threshold, their income tax rate, because it's all taken out through PAYE, it's not like a mortgage or a credit card debt, is 29%, not 20%. That is indeed a big change in the British labour market, but it is nothing like young people having overdrafts or credit card debt. It's not that kind of transaction.
Lastly, some of these Vice-Chancellors, Lord Willits, are earning, they're almost like Premier League football players, £451,000 for someone, the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Bath, figures of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Is it sustainable? Is it justifiable?
Well, I can see that some of those examples are egregious, and I can understand the furore that's broken out. But let's keep this in proportion. If, and Andrew Adonis, who started this, if there's about 100 Vice-Chancellors in English universities. If Andrew Adonis thinks they're each earning £100,000 too much, that's £10 million. The fees bring £11 billion a year into our universities to educate our students. Right. To deprive them of that because you think £10 million is badly spent would be absolutely letting the tail wag the dog. It's not proportionate.
How much is too much? Everybody seems to have their pay compared to the Prime Minister. Should they be paid more than her?
Well, of course, universities are not part of the public sector. They're charitable institutions. They have to have rigorous assessment of what Vice-Chancellors are paid. But the level of Vice-Chancellor pay is not a reason for changing a system that is delivering to over 1 million students and bringing billions of pounds into our higher education.
You brought the word egregious into the conversation, Lord Willits. What figure is egregious?
Well, one of the good features of our universities is they're autonomous bodies, so I'm not going to tell universities
all right, we'll do it a
what their
different way. Is £250,000 egregious?
Look, one of the reasons why our universities are high quality is that we do not run them from Whitehall. There are countries where politicians decide pay rates in universities, and thank heavens England is not one of them.
But it was you who brought the word egregious in. There must be a figure. Do I go to 300,000?
Well, people will all have their personal views, but I'm not going to... I think it's quite important for our universities that these pay rates are determined properly in professional remuneration arrangements, but I don't think it's for me to tell universities and to comment on what individual pay rates are, because I think universities are autonomous and that should be respected.
Lord Willits, thank you for your time this evening. Let's turn to the National Union of Students. Now, you believe effectively that all fees should be scrapped. Am I right in saying that?
That's correct.
Which, you know, is a noble initiative. How are we going to pay for it?
Look, First of all, I want to congratulate all the students who got A-level results today. I think it's really, really good and really important that they're coming to our universities. Unfortunately, the reality is they're going to be saddled with lots and lots of debt. Now, as David Willetts made very clear, clearly there was a problem with the underfunding of universities. Now, somebody has to pay for it, and it's completely unacceptable to say that this has to be forced on the individual students. Generations of young people who are now set to be worse off than their parents. This should be paid through progressive taxation.
Tell me how that works.
The idea that there's no money left was blown open at this election. OK, we saw Theresa May saying that there's absolutely no money left and then managed to find quite a lot of money for the DUP. So I think the conversation has now shifted. A lot of people are seeing young people set up to be worse off than their parents. And there are a whole load of options that we can look into. But I think the issue that we're facing now is that the government aren't even willing to concede that there is a problem with the system. They're going guns blazing as if this is everything is absolutely fine and it's absolutely OK that young people are coming out of university with higher and higher debts. We don't think that that's right, and we think that the society as a whole should pay for higher education as a public good.
Come back to you in a minute, Mr. Stoker. Let's bring Sir David Bell in. Just to remind everyone, you're Vice-Chancellor of the University of Reading. We hear today it's a buyer's market. You're at the coalface. How accurate is that description?
Students have got much more choice than they've ever had before. The removal of caps on the numbers of students that universities could take has made the system more competitive. I actually think that's good for students because they have much more choice. So yes, it has felt like a competitive situation.
Is it good for universities?
I think it is good for universities, really? Yes, because I
thought they were scrabbling around to get people.
No, I think it actually enables universities to think about what it is that they offer prospective students. Students are more demanding, they're more selective, and therefore it's important that we do provide what it is that they expect to get a good education.
I was trying to get Lord Willetts to talk about a figure that might be egregious. I understand you're paid in the region of £264,000 per annum. Is that egregious?
Well, it's not for me to judge, because the decisions about my pay are not made by me. They're made by independent members of the university governing body. The same situation as applies around the country. And it's for those lay members of governing bodies, it's for them to make the decisions about what they think is appropriate.
But I'm interested in this, Sir David, because how is it worked out? Reading is a high-flying university. You're 27th, no question about it, so well done. But if we look at the pay packets, you're considerably higher up there. You're effectively Steve Bruce of Aston Villa earning the money of Arsene Wenger of Arsenal. Why?
Well, as I say, I don't think it's for me to judge what's an appropriate level of remuneration. That's for the independent members of university governing bodies to come to that decision, and they will take account of a variety of factors, including the relative pay of vice-chancellors compared to others around the world. They'll take account of the responsibilities we have. And don't forget, we are running major enterprises in universities.
You are. Just finally, we've studied some of the courses available. £9,000 to study food marketing at Reading University. What's the student going to learn?
Well, students learn actually a lot that's valuable. The food industry in this country employs over 2.5 million people. There are great jobs available in marketing around the food industry.
And that's something I want to bring you in, Mr. Duggan. We heard again from Lord Willetts that with the pressure now in the job market, actually young people have to go and get these degrees or they're really disadvantaged, they're really handicapping themselves. Again, you're at the coalface of that part. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think I would encourage a lot of people to go to university, but actually,
not everyone, though.
But it's about options, and this is the reality. Is National Union of Students represents over 7 million students across higher education, but also in further education. And further education are currently in the majority, but I think many people within NUS would agree that they aren't often seen on a par with higher education. So I think it's really important that young people come out of school and they have options which are valued by society as equal.
But students struggling in some cases to pay these fees, to pay back these loans. Are you going to give me a figure that's egregious? Do you think Vice-Chancellor should be making this sort of money?
Look, I'm not going to get drawn into...
Why will nobody give me this? I've tried so hard.
What I would say, though, is that it is quite difficult for students to stomach to see some of these very, very high figures at a time when they're having to take on a lot of debt, at a time when actually the Vice-Chancellors have done very little to stop us going down this road. So I think that issue needs to be dealt with, but it's not the only issue and won't solve the current funding crisis in higher education.
Amity Doko, thank you. Good luck with your studies, of course, Sir David, thank you, and good luck with getting the students into your university.